The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in November 1883, informing Willa Emerson that her aunt had died and left her a small ranch outside Trinidad, Colorado, along with debts that exceeded the property's value by a considerable margin. Willa stood on the train platform clutching her single carpetbag, watching the locomotive disappear into the distance with a plume of black smoke trailing behind it. The air was crisp and thin at this altitude, and she pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 22 years old, she had left St. Louis with nothing but hope and determination, trading her position as a seamstress for the uncertain promise of land ownership. Her Aunt Martha had been a woman she barely remembered from childhood, stern-faced and independent, who had ventured west after being widowed and never looked back. The town of Trinidad sprawled before her, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts pressed against the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Dust swirled in the streets where wagons rolled past, and the sound of hammering echoed from somewhere nearby. Willa asked directions from a shopkeeper and learned that her aunt's ranch lay 8 miles northwest, up a winding trail that would take most of the afternoon to reach on foot. She started walking, her boots kicking up small clouds of dirt with each step. The carpetbag grew heavier with each mile, and she switched it from hand to hand, ignoring the burning in her shoulders. The landscape was unlike anything she had known in Missouri, vast and open, with scrub brush dotting the rolling hills and mountains rising purple and imposing in the distance. The sky seemed impossibly large, stretching endlessly overhead in a dome of piercing blue. By the time she reached the property, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The ranch house was smaller than she had imagined, a rough-hewn cabin with a sagging porch and a stone chimney. Behind it stood a barn that leaned slightly to one side, and a corral held 3 horses that watched her approach with curious eyes. Smoke rose from the chimney, which startled her, since she had expected the place to be abandoned. Willa approached cautiously, setting down her bag on the porch steps. Before she could knock, the door swung open, and a man stood framed in the doorway. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-green, like sage after rain, and they studied her with equal parts surprise and wariness. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and even. "I'm Willa Emerson," she said, straightening her spine despite her exhaustion. "Martha Emerson was my aunt. This is my property now." The man's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for her to read. He stepped back, opening the door wider. "You'd better come in. I'm Wade Lawson. I've been working for your aunt for the past 2 years." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace crackling with warmth and a rough-hewn table surrounded by mismatched chairs. Willa could see her aunt's touches in the checked curtains at the windows and the braided rug on the floor. Wade gestured for her to sit, and she sank gratefully into a chair, her feet throbbing. "I didn't know Martha had any family," Wade said, moving to the stove and pouring coffee into a tin cup. He set it before her, and she wrapped her cold hands around it gratefully. "She never mentioned anyone. We weren't close," Willa admitted. "I only met her once when I was a child, but she left me this place in her will, along with a letter saying I was her only living relative." Wade nodded slowly, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. In the firelight, she could see the lines around his eyes, the weathered quality of someone who spent their days outdoors. She guessed him to be perhaps 28 or 30, though it was hard to tell. "There are things you should know," he said quietly. "Martha owed money to several people in town. The feed store, the blacksmith, the general store. She had been sick for months before she passed, and the ranch has been barely holding on. Willa felt her heart sink, though this confirmed what the telegram had hinted at. How much does she owe? Close to $300, all told. Wade's expression was sympathetic but honest. The livestock is worth maybe half that. The land itself has value, but selling it would take time. $300 might as well have been $3,000 for all that Willa possessed. She had spent her last coins on the train ticket west. I see, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stared into the dark coffee, watching steam rise from its surface. Then I'll have to work. I'll manage the ranch myself, sell what I can, and pay off the debts. Wade studied her for a long moment, taking in her thin frame and city-soft hands. Winter's coming, he said gently. This isn't St. Louis. The work here is hard, and the cold can kill you if you're not prepared for it. I'm stronger than I look, Willa said, meeting his eyes with determination. I've worked since I was 14. I can learn to do whatever needs doing. Something flickered in Wade's expression, something that might have been respect. I believe you, he said. But believing you're strong and actually surviving a Colorado winter are different things. He paused, seeming to wrestle with a decision. I've been staying in the barn loft. Martha paid me in room and board mostly, since she couldn't afford wages. I was planning to move on after she passed, but I could stay through the winter if you'd like, help you get established. Willa felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. I can't pay you, she said honestly. I have nothing. I know, Wade said. But Martha was good to me when I needed work, and I don't feel right leaving you here alone to face what's coming. He straightened, his decision made. We'll work together to keep the place running. Come spring, we can figure out what to do about the debts. That first night, Willa slept in the cabin's single bedroom, in the narrow bed where her aunt had died. Wade returned to his quarters in the barn, and she lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices rising and falling in eerie harmony. The wind rattled the windows, and the house creaked and settled around her. She thought of her life in St. Louis, the cramped boarding house room she had shared with 2 other seamstresses, the long hours bent over needlework in dim light. That life had been hard, but at least it had been predictable. Here, she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. She woke before dawn to the sound of movement outside. When she emerged from the bedroom, still wearing the dress she had traveled in, she found Wade gone and the coffee pot warm on the stove. She poured herself a cup and went to the window, watching as the sky slowly lightened from black to deep blue to pearl gray. Wade appeared from the barn, carrying 2 buckets of water from the well. He moved with an easy efficiency, his breath misting in the cold air. Willa pulled on her shawl and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath. Wade looked up as she approached, setting down the buckets. You should have stayed inside where it's warm, he said. I need to learn, Willa replied. Show me what needs doing. For the next several hours, Wade walked her through the daily routine of ranch life. There were 3 horses to feed and water, along with a dozen chickens that provided eggs, 2 milk cows, and a small herd of cattle that grazed on the scrublands surrounding the property. There was wood to be chopped and stacked for the winter, water to be hauled, stalls to be mucked, and 100 other tasks that Willa had never imagined. By midday, her hands were blistered and her back ached. Wade worked steadily beside her, demonstrating techniques and offering quiet corrections when she struggled. He was patient but not condescending, treating her like someone capable of learning rather than someone to be pitied. When she hauled her first bucket of water from the well without spilling half of it, he nodded approvingly. You're a quick study, he said. The days fell into a rhythm. Willa rose before dawn and worked until after dark, pushing herself to learn everything she could. Wade was always there, his steady presence a constant in the chaos of her new life. He taught her to milk the cows, to collect eggs without startling the hens, to recognize when a horse was favoring a leg and might need attention. He showed her how to mend a fence rail and how to read the weather in the color of the sky and the behavior of the animals. As November gave way to December, the work only grew harder. The first snow came in the night, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Willa stood on the porch in the gray dawn, staring at the transformed landscape. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Wade emerged from the barn, already dressed in a heavy coat and thick gloves. "This is just the beginning," he said, coming to stand beside her. "By January, we'll have drifts up to the porch rail." Willa felt panic flutter in her chest but pushed it down. "Then we'd better get to work," she said. Wade looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the dark circles under her eyes and the way she held herself too stiffly, as if afraid to show weakness. "Willa," he said gently, "you've been pushing yourself too hard. You're going to collapse if you keep this up." "I can't afford to collapse," she said. "There's too much to do." "And it will all still be here tomorrow," Wade replied. "You need to rest or you'll be no good to anyone." When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "I'm serious. Go inside, warm up, and take the day to recover." "I'll handle the chores." "I can't ask you to do that," Willa said, though every muscle in her body was screaming for relief. "You're not asking, I'm telling you." Wade's tone was firm but kind. "This isn't St. Louis. Out here, you have to learn when to push and when to rest, or the land will break you." Martha learned that the hard way, working herself sick even when her body was telling her to stop. The mention of her aunt made Willa pause. She had found a few letters in the cabin, enough to piece together that Martha had been a stubborn woman who had refused help until it was too late. "All right," she said quietly, "just for today." Wade's expression softened with relief. "Good. There's venison stew left from last night. Eat and then sleep. I'll check on you this evening." He left her standing on the porch and headed out into the snow, his boots leaving deep prints in the fresh powder. Willa watched him go, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling as gratitude mixed with something warmer, something she was not quite ready to name. Inside, the cabin was warm and quiet. Willa heated the stew and ate slowly, savoring the rich flavor. When had she last eaten a full meal? She couldn't remember. After washing the dishes, she returned to the bedroom and lay down, intending to rest for just an hour. She fell asleep almost immediately, tumbling into darkness so deep it felt like falling. She woke to find the room dim with twilight. For a moment, she panicked, thinking she had slept the entire day away and left Wade to do everything alone. But when she stumbled into the main room, she found him there, stirring something on the stove. He looked up and smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something warm and open. "You're awake," he said. "Good timing. Dinner's almost ready." "You should have woken me," Willa said, though she felt more rested than she had in weeks. "You needed the sleep," Wade replied simply. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table. "Sit. Eat." They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the scrape of spoons against tin bowls. Outside, snow continued to fall, visible through the window in the fading light. Willa found herself studying Wade when he was not looking, noticing details she had been too tired to register before. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the strong line of his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work. He was handsome, she realized, in a quiet, unassuming way that had nothing to do with fancy clothes or refined manners. "Where are you from?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Wade looked up, his green-gray eyes meeting hers. Kansas originally. My family had a farm there, but we lost it after a bad drought. I was 18 when I headed west, looking for work. I've been drifting ever since, picking up jobs where I can find them. Do you have family still in Kansas? A sister, married with children. I send her money when I have it. He paused, turning his spoon in his hand. What about you? Why leave St. Louis for a place you'd never seen? Willa considered her answer carefully. Because in St. Louis, I would have spent the rest of my life in that boarding house, sewing until my eyes gave out, never having anything of my own. When I got the telegram about the ranch, it felt like a chance. Even with the debts, even knowing it would be hard, it was more than I had before. Wade nodded slowly, understanding in his expression. I know that feeling. The need to have something that's yours, even if it's just a small piece of land in the middle of nowhere. Do you think I'm foolish? Willa asked. Thinking I can make this work? No, Wade said without hesitation. Foolish would be giving up without trying. You're one of the most determined people I've ever met, Willa Emerson. If anyone can save this ranch, it's you. The sincerity in his voice made heat rise to her cheeks, and she looked down at her bowl to hide her reaction. They finished eating, and Wade insisted on cleaning up while Willa sat by the fire. As he washed the dishes, he talked about his plans for the next few days, the repairs that needed making before the worst of winter arrived, the cattle that would need to be brought closer to the barn. I can help, Willa said. I know you can, Wade replied, but you're going to learn to pace yourself. One day of rest doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're smart enough to know your limits. Over the following weeks, a partnership developed between them that felt natural and right. Wade proved to be a man of his word, handling the heaviest chores and teaching Willa skills without making her feel incompetent. In turn, Willa brought order to the cabin, mending his shirts and cooking meals that were more elaborate than the simple fare Wade had been making for himself. She found Martha's old receipt book and began baking bread, the smell of it filling the cabin with warmth. As Christmas approached, the snow piled higher and the days grew shorter. Willa and Wade fell into a routine of working together during the daylight hours and spending the evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, and that he could play the harmonica, though he was shy about it. He learned that she had a gift for storytelling, and would often ask her to recount books she had read, since the ranch had only a handful of volumes. One evening in late December, as they sat by the fire after supper, Wade pulled out his harmonica and played a soft, melancholy tune. The notes seemed to hang in the air, filled with longing and something deeper. When he finished, Willa found herself blinking back tears. That was beautiful, she said quietly. It's an old song my mother used to sing, Wade said, turning the harmonica over in his hands. I think of her every time I play it. Is she gone? Yes, 10 years now. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. She would have liked you. She always said that strength came in many forms, and that the strongest people were the ones who kept going even when everything seemed impossible. I don't feel very strong most days, Willa admitted. I feel like I'm barely holding on. Wade looked at her, his expression intense. But you are holding on. That's what matters. You haven't given up, even though you had every reason to. You got on a train and traveled halfway across the country to a place you'd never been, to claim a property you'd never seen. That takes courage. Or desperation, Willa said with a slight smile. Sometimes they're the same thing, Wade replied. He shifted in his chair, seeming to wrestle with something. Willa, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about the debts, about what we can do come spring. I have some money saved, not much, but maybe $50. I want you to have it to put toward what Martha owed. No, Willa said immediately. I can't take your money, Wade. You've already done so much. It's not charity, Wade said firmly. It's an investment. I believe in this place and I believe in you. Let me help. Willa felt her throat tighten with emotion. In her entire life, no one had ever offered her something without expecting anything in return. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you doing all this for me? Wade held her gaze, and in his eyes she saw something that made her heart race. Because somewhere along the way, he said slowly, this stopped being just a job. You stopped being just Martha's niece. I care what happens to you, Willa. I care what happens to this ranch. And I'm not ready to walk away from either. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Willa wanted to say something, to acknowledge what she heard in his voice and saw in his eyes, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she said too much and ruined this fragile thing growing between them? I care too, she finally said, the words inadequate but true. About the ranch, about you being here. Wade smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made him look years younger. Then we're agreed. Come spring, we face the debts together. Christmas arrived on a clear, cold morning. Willa woke to find that Wade had cut a small pine tree and set it up in the corner of the main room. He had decorated it with strings of popcorn and dried berries, and the sight of it made her eyes sting with tears. In St. Louis, Christmas had been just another day, marked only by slightly better food at the boarding house. But here, in this rough cabin in the middle of the wilderness, Wade had created something special. "Merry Christmas," he said when she emerged from the bedroom. He looked almost embarrassed, one hand rubbing the back of his neck. "I know it's not much. It's perfect," Willa said and meant it. She went to her room and retrieved the small bundle she had hidden there. "I made you something." She handed him the package wrapped in brown paper, suddenly nervous. Inside were 2 pairs of thick wool socks she had knitted from yarn she had found in Martha's things, working on them in the evenings after Wade had gone to the barn. Wade unwrapped them carefully, his calloused fingers gentle on the paper. "These are wonderful," he said, looking up at her with genuine pleasure. "My old ones are more holes than wool. Thank you, Willa." "It's nothing compared to everything you've done," she said. "It's not nothing," Wade said seriously. "You made them with your own hands for me. That means more than you know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "Here, I made this for you." Willa unwrapped it to find a carved wooden bird, smooth and perfect in its details. It was a meadowlark, she realized, its beak open as if in song. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every feather delicately rendered. "Wade, this is beautiful," she breathed, turning it over in her hands. "I had no idea you could do something like this." "I learned from my father," Wade said. "He was a carpenter before we tried farming. I don't do it much anymore, but I wanted you to have something to remember your first Christmas here." Willa looked up at him, the carved bird cradled carefully in her palm, and felt something shift inside her. This was more than gratitude, more than friendship. This was the beginning of something that both thrilled and terrified her. "I'll treasure it always," she said softly. They celebrated with a special dinner that Willa had been planning for days. She had saved back portions of ingredients to make a proper feast. Roasted chicken, biscuits with the last of the preserves from Martha's cellar, and a simple cake sweetened with molasses. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, and Wade played his harmonica while Willa cleaned up. As evening fell, they sat by the fire closer than usual, their shoulders almost touching. "This is the best Christmas I've had in years," Wade said quietly. "Maybe the best ever." "Mine too," Willa agreed. She turned to look at him, taking in his profile in the firelight. "I'm glad you stayed, Wade. I don't think I could have done any of this without you." "You're stronger than you think," Wade said, but his voice was rough with emotion. He turned to face her, and suddenly they were very close, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. Willa, whatever he was going to say was interrupted by a sudden commotion from outside. The horses were neighing frantically, and they heard the sound of the chickens squawking in alarm. Wade was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle from above the door. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the door. But Willa was right behind him, snatching up the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. They rushed outside into the cold night air, their breath fogging. In the moonlight reflecting off the snow, they could see a large shape moving near the chicken coop, a dark shadow against the white. A bear, Willa realized with a jolt of fear, its massive bulk unmistakable even in the darkness. Wade raised the rifle and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the silent landscape, and the bear reared up on its hind legs, massive and terrifying. For a heart-stopping moment, Willa thought it might charge them. But then it dropped back to all fours and lumbered away, disappearing into the trees at the edge of the property. They stood frozen for several minutes, making sure it was truly gone. Finally, Wade lowered the rifle and let out a shaky breath. "We need to check the animals." The chickens were frantic but unharmed, and the horses had calmed once the threat had passed. Wade reinforced the coop with additional boards, working quickly despite the cold. Willa held the lantern for him, her hands trembling from more than just the temperature. "That bear should be hibernating," Wade said as they finally returned to the cabin. "It's late in the season for one to be out. Probably a young male that didn't put on enough fat before winter. It might come back." "What do we do?" Willa asked. "We stay vigilant. Keep the animals secured, don't go out after dark alone." Wade set the rifle back in its place and turned to her. "Are you all right? You're shaking." "I'm fine," Willa said, but her voice wavered. The reality of how dangerous their isolation could be had hit her hard. "I've just never seen a bear before, not up close like that." Wade stepped closer, his hands hovering uncertainly before settling gently on her shoulders. "You were brave, coming out here with me. Most people would have stayed inside." "I wasn't going to let you face it alone," Willa said, looking up at him. His hands were warm through the fabric of her dress, solid and reassuring. "We're partners, remember? Partners," Wade repeated, something flickering across his face. His hands tightened slightly on her shoulders, and for a moment she thought he might pull her closer. But then he stepped back, letting his hands drop. "You should get some sleep. I'll keep watch tonight, make sure that bear doesn't come back." "You need rest too," Willa protested. "I'll sleep tomorrow," Wade said. "Tonight I need to make sure you're safe." There was something in his voice, a fierce protectiveness that made Willa's heart clench. "Wade," she said softly, but he was already moving away, adding wood to the fire and checking the windows. She recognized the gesture for what it was, a retreat from whatever had been building between them before the bear interrupted. Disappointment and relief warred within her as she retreated to the bedroom. She lay awake for a long time, listening to Wade moving around the main room. Through the crack under the door, she could see the flickering light of the fire and the shadow of his boots as he paced. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into restless sleep, filled with dreams of bears and gunshots and the feeling of Wade's hands on her shoulders. The bear did not return that night or the next, but its appearance had changed something. Wade became more protective, insisting that Willa stay close to the cabin unless he was with her. She chafed at the restriction at first, but came to understand. It was not about doubting her capability, but about caring for her safety. The winter deepened, bringing storms that buried the ranch in white and forced them to spend days at a time inside the cabin together. Those storm-bound days created an intimacy that felt both natural and dangerously compelling. They would work on small tasks together, Willa mending clothes while Wade carved wood or repaired tack. They talked about their dreams and fears, their pasts and possible futures. Wade told her about the places he had seen in his wandering years, the mountains and prairies and distant horizons. Willa shared memories of her childhood, of her parents who had died when she was young, and the hard years that followed in an orphanage before she was old enough to work. "You've had a difficult life," Wade said one afternoon as they sat by the fire, a blizzard howling outside. "No more difficult than yours," Willa replied. "We've both known hardship." "True," Wade acknowledged. He was whittling a piece of wood, his knife moving with practiced ease. "But you haven't let it make you bitter. You still have hope, still believe things can get better. I admire that." "Some days I'm not sure I believe it," Willa admitted. "Some days I wonder if I made a terrible mistake coming here. But then I look around at this place, at what we're building together, and I think maybe it will be all right after all." Wade looked up from his carving, his eyes intense. "It will be all right, Willa. I promise you that. Whatever it takes, we'll make it work." The way he said "we" with such certainty and conviction made Willa's breath catch. "Why?" she asked, not for the first time. "Why does this matter so much to you? It's not your land, not your debt. You could leave any time and find work somewhere else." Wade set down his knife and the piece of wood, giving her his full attention. "Do you really not know?" he asked quietly. Willa's heart began to race. "I think I might," she whispered, "but I need to hear you say it." Wade stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling in front of her chair so they were eye to eye. His hands found hers, rough and warm, his touch sending electricity through her. "I'm staying because I can't imagine being anywhere else," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I'm staying because, when I think about my future, you're in it. I'm staying because somewhere between teaching you to milk cows and watching you tackle every challenge this place throws at you, I fell in love with you, Willa Emerson." Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks as joy and relief flooded through her. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid I was wrong about what you felt." "You weren't wrong," Wade said, raising one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I should have told you sooner, but I wasn't sure I had the right. I'm just a drifter with $50 to my name. You deserve someone who can give you more." "I don't want more," Willa said fiercely. "I want you. Just you, exactly as you are." Wade's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. Then he was leaning in and Willa met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home. It was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something more urgent. Willa's hands tangled in his hair and Wade's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast and we don't have much, but marry me, Willa. Let's build this life together properly. Let's make this ranch ours, not just yours." "Yes," Willa said without hesitation. "Yes, Wade, I'll marry you." They kissed again. Longer this time, the blizzard forgotten, the world forgotten. Nothing existing beyond the two of them and the future they had just promised each other. When they finally pulled apart, Wade was grinning like a boy, and Willa felt lighter than she had in years, as if a weight she had not known she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. "We should go to town as soon as the weather clears," Wade said, still holding her close. "Talk to the minister, make it official." "What about the debts?" Willa asked. "People in town know I have nothing. They'll think you're foolish for marrying me." "Let them think what they want," Wade said. "We'll face the debts together, figure out a plan, but first I want you to be my wife. I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours." They spent the rest of the storm-bound days in a haze of happiness, stealing kisses when the mood struck, making plans for their future. Wade moved his things from the barn into the cabin, setting up a bedroll by the fire to maintain propriety until they could be properly married. But the nights were long, and they would often sit up talking until the fire burned low, reluctant to separate even for sleep. When the storm finally cleared, they bundled up and made the journey to Trinidad. The town was bustling with activity, people emerging from their homes after days of being snowed in. They went first to the general store, where the owner, Mr. Patterson, greeted them with surprise. "Miss Emerson," he said, his tone reserved, "I wasn't sure you'd made it through the winter. Your aunt owed me $60. "I know, sir," Willa said, drawing herself up, "and I intend to pay you back, but I need a bit more time. Spring is coming and we'll have cattle to sell." Mr. Patterson looked skeptical, but before he could respond, Wade stepped forward. He emphasized, "Miss Emerson and I are to be married. Whatever debts she has, I'm taking on as well. You have my word that you'll be paid in full." The store owner's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" "Well, congratulations then. I suppose we can work out a payment plan. Your aunt was good people, just had some hard luck. I hope you two fare better." They visited the other merchants Martha had owed money to, making similar arrangements. Most were willing to wait for payment, especially once word spread that Willa was marrying Wade. Several people remembered him from his time working for Martha and spoke well of his character. By the time they reached the church, Willa felt the weight of the debt slightly less crushing. They were still there, still daunting, but now she had Wade beside her, and that made all the difference. The minister, Reverend Thomas, was a kindly man in his 50s who agreed to marry them the following Sunday. "That will give me time to post the banns properly," he explained. "And it will give you two time to make sure this is what you want. Marriage is a serious commitment." "We're sure," Wade said firmly, his hand finding Willa's. "We know what we want." The week that followed was busy with preparations. Willa altered one of Martha's better dresses to fit her, dyeing it a deep blue with berries she had saved. Wade cleaned his only good suit and bought a new shirt from Mr. Patterson. They invited no one to the ceremony, having no friends or family in Trinidad, but several of the townspeople showed up anyway, curious to see the city girl marry the wandering cowboy. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Willa stood beside Wade in the small church, the winter sun streaming through the windows, and pledged her life to his. Wade's voice was steady as he made his vows, his eyes never leaving her face. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, Wade kissed her with such tenderness that several of the watching women sighed. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, riding together on one of Martha's horses, Willa sitting in front of Wade with his arms around her. The sky was clear and bright, and the mountains stood sharp against the horizon. When they reached the cabin, Wade dismounted and then lifted Willa down, holding her for a moment before setting her on her feet. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said softly. "Mrs. Lawson," Willa repeated, testing out the sound of it. "I like how that sounds." That night, Wade built up the fire until the cabin was warm and glowing. They moved together with the nervous excitement of newlyweds, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Wade was patient and tender, careful with her inexperience, and Willa gave herself to him completely, trusting him with her body as she already trusted him with her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Wade's arms around her and her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," Willa whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Wade replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Wade and Willa worked side by side during the day, partners in every sense of the word. He taught her to ride properly, and together they would check on the cattle, making sure none had wandered too far or gotten into trouble. Willa proved to have a good eye for spotting problems, noticing when an animal was limping or off its feed before Wade did. The evenings were theirs alone, precious hours spent in front of the fire or at the table over supper. Wade continued his carving, making small wooden animals that Willa arranged on a shelf. She read aloud from Martha's books, and Wade would listen with his eyes closed, his hand resting on her knee. Some nights they would simply sit in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes between two people who are completely at ease with each other. As the snow began to melt, and the first signs of green appeared on the hills, they turned their attention to the problem of the debts. Wade had been carefully calculating how much they might make from selling cattle, and the numbers were not encouraging. "Even if we get a good price, we'll only clear maybe $200, he said one evening, going over the figures again. "That leaves us $100 short, plus we'll need operating money for the rest of the year." Willa chewed her lip, thinking, what if we sold some of the land? Just a small parcel enough to cover what we need. "We could," Wade said slowly. "But land is the one thing we have that's truly valuable. Once it's gone, we can't get it back." "Then what do we do?" Wade was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed. "There's a man in Pueblo, runs a large ranch. He sometimes hires on extra hands for the spring roundup and pays decent wages. If I could work for him for a few months, I could earn the rest of what we need." The thought of Wade leaving, even temporarily, made Willa's chest tighten with anxiety, but she forced herself to think practically. "Could I manage here alone for that long?" "You're more than capable," Wade said. "And it would only be until summer. I'd be back before the heat of July." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I hate the idea of leaving you, but I don't see another way, unless you want to sell the land." Willa shook her head. "No, this place is ours. We keep it whole." She squeezed his hand. "You go to Pueblo, earn what we need. I'll manage here. We've come this far. We can make it the rest of the way." "That's my brave girl," Wade said, his eyes shining with pride and love. 2 weeks later, Wade rode out at dawn, his saddlebags packed with supplies and his promise to return as soon as he could. Willa stood on the porch and watched until he disappeared from view, then turned back to the cabin, squaring her shoulders. She had work to do. The first few days alone were the hardest. The cabin felt empty without Wade's presence, too quiet and too large. Willa threw herself into work, tending the animals, maintaining the property, and preparing for the spring planting. She had learned well over the winter, and the tasks that had once seemed impossible were now routine. But she missed Wade desperately, missed his steady presence and quiet humor, missed the warmth of his body beside her at night. He had promised to write when he could, and true to his word, a letter arrived 3 weeks after he left. The proprietor of the general store in Trinidad had agreed to hold any mail for them, and Willa made the journey to town specifically to check. Mr. Patterson handed her the envelope with a knowing smile. "Your husband must be away working," he said. "Yes," Willa confirmed. "He'll be back by summer." She waited until she was back at the ranch to open the letter, savoring the anticipation. Wade's handwriting was careful and precise, each letter formed with thought. He wrote about the journey to Pueblo, about the ranch where he was working and the other hands he had met. He wrote about missing her, about how strange it felt to sleep under someone else's roof and eat meals she had not prepared. At the end, he added that he was sending money with the next mail, the first of his earnings. Willa read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in the box where she kept her precious things. She wrote a reply immediately, telling him about life on the ranch, about a calf that had been born and the repairs she had made to the chicken coop. She told him she loved him and missed him and counted the days until he would return. The weeks passed slowly but steadily. Spring bloomed across the Colorado landscape, painting the hills with wildflowers and bringing warmth back to the air. Willa worked from sunrise to sunset, building calluses upon calluses, her body growing lean and strong. She proved herself more capable than she had imagined, handling problems as they arose with resourcefulness and determination. One evening in late May, as she was closing up the barn for the night, she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Her heart leaped, hoping it might be Wade returning early, but as the rider came into view, she saw it was a stranger. He was young, perhaps 20, with a nervous manner and a worn saddle. "Madam," he called, pulling his horse to a stop near the corral. "I'm looking for work. Any chance you need a hand?" Willa studied him carefully. He looked hungry and tired, his clothes dusty from travel. "What's your name?" she asked. "Billy Crawford, madam. I can work with cattle, horses, whatever you need. I'm a hard worker and I don't eat much." Willa made a decision. "I can offer you meals and a place to sleep in the barn for a few days, and maybe a little pay if you can help me with some repairs." "My husband is away working, but he'll be back soon." Relief washed over Billy's face. "Thank you, madam. I appreciate it more than you know." Billy proved to be as good as his word, working hard and asking for little in return. He was respectful and kept his distance, seeming to understand that Willa was a married woman and treating her accordingly. With his help, they managed to fix the leaning barn wall, a task that would have been nearly impossible for Willa alone. After a week, she paid him what she could spare and he moved on, but his brief presence had reminded her that there were still kind people in the world, folks just trying to make their way as best they could. June arrived with heat and long days. Willa received another letter from Wade, this one more hopeful. The work in Pueblo was going well, and he expected to have enough money by the end of the month. He missed her terribly, he wrote, and dreamed of her every night. Reading his words, Willa felt tears prick her eyes. She had never imagined that love could be like this, both joyous and painful, making her feel complete and incomplete at the same time. Finally, on a blazing afternoon in early July, Willa looked up from weeding the vegetable garden she had planted to see a familiar figure riding up the trail. She dropped her tools and ran, not caring about dignity or decorum, her only thought to reach Wade as fast as possible. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and caught her as she threw herself into his arms. "Willa," he breathed against her hair, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. "God, I missed you." "I missed you too," she said, tears streaming down her face. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her hands framing his face. He looked thinner, more tired, with deeper lines around his eyes. But he was smiling, really smiling, and that was all that mattered. "Let me look at you," Wade said, his hands on her shoulders as he studied her. "You're so brown from the sun, and you've lost weight." "So have you," Willa pointed out, "but I've been eating fine. The work just keeps me busy." "You've been managing everything alone," Wade said, looking around at the ranch with clear approval. "The place looks good, Willa, better than when I left. You've done an amazing job." Pride swelled in Willa's chest. "I had a good teacher," she said. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Wade leading his horse. Inside, Willa heated water for coffee while Wade unpacked his saddlebags. He pulled out a small leather pouch and set it on the table with a satisfying clink. $150, he said. "Combined with what we'll make from the cattle, we can pay off every debt and still have money left over for supplies and improvements." Willa stared at the pouch, hardly able to believe it. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Wade corrected, pulling her into his arms again. "You held everything together while I was gone. You proved that this ranch is yours, that you have every right to it." That night, they celebrated with a special dinner and then retreated to their bedroom, making up for the months of separation with passion and tenderness. Later, as they lay tangled together, Wade's fingers traced lazy patterns on Willa's bare shoulder. "I never want to be apart from you that long again," he said quietly. "It was torture being away, not knowing if you were all right." "I'm all right," Willa assured him. "More than all right. I'm strong, Wade. You helped me discover that." "You always were strong," Wade said. "I just helped you see it." The next few weeks were busy with activity. Wade drove a small herd of cattle to market in Trinidad, getting a good price from a buyer who was passing through on his way to Denver. With the money from the cattle sale and Wade's earnings, they visited each of the merchants Martha had owed money to, paying off the debts in full. The relief Willa felt as she watched Wade hand over the last payment was indescribable, like a physical weight lifting from her shoulders. Mr. Patterson counted the money carefully and then extended his hand to Wade. "Paid in full," he said. "Your wife's credit is good here anytime, Mr. Lawson. Both of yours." They bought supplies for the ranch, including tools they desperately needed and seeds for expanding the vegetable garden. Wade purchased a young bull to improve their herd, and Willa bought chickens to increase their flock. As they loaded everything into their wagon, Willa felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not just the desperate hope of survival, but genuine hope for the future, for building something lasting and good. As summer deepened into August, life on the ranch fell into a peaceful rhythm. Wade and Willa worked together, improving the property bit by bit. They reinforced the barn properly, built a smokehouse for preserving meat, and expanded the corral. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains, Wade's arm around Willa's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "I've been thinking," Wade said one such evening. "This ranch needs a proper name, something better than the old Emerson place." "What did you have in mind?" Willa asked. "I was thinking we could call it Meadowlark Ranch," Wade said. "After that first carving I made you, the one you keep on the shelf." Willa turned to look at him, touched by the sentiment. "Meadowlark Ranch," she repeated. "I love it, it's perfect." They commissioned a sign from the carpenter in Trinidad, and when it was finished, Wade mounted it proudly at the entrance to their property. Meadowlark Ranch, it proclaimed in bold letters, established 1884. Wade and Willa Lawson, proprietors. Standing beside Wade, looking at the sign, Willa felt a surge of accomplishment so strong it brought tears to her eyes. A year ago, she had been a seamstress in a boarding house with no prospects and no hope for a better life. Now she was a rancher's wife, a landowner, a woman with a future. More importantly, she was loved by a man she loved in return, a man who had seen her at her weakest and believed in her strength. "Happy?" Wade asked, watching her face. "More than I ever imagined possible," Willa replied honestly. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this was all a dream." "It's no dream," Wade said, pulling her close. "This is real. We're real. And we're just getting started." As fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and shorter days, Willa realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. At first, she attributed it to the hard work and sparse eating of the previous months, but as other symptoms appeared, she began to suspect the truth. Her breasts were tender, and she felt queasy in the mornings. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, a wave of nausea overwhelmed her and she had to sit down suddenly. Wade was at her side immediately, his face concerned. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" "I don't think I'm ill," Willa said slowly, meeting his eyes. "Wade, I think I might be with child." Wade's expression went through several changes in rapid succession: surprise, joy, fear, and finally settling on something like awe. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Not completely," Willa admitted, "but all the signs are there. I should probably see a doctor to confirm, but yes, I think I'm sure." Wade knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Willa, that's incredible." "Are you happy?" Willa asked, suddenly nervous. They had never discussed children, had been too focused on simple survival to think that far ahead. "Happy. I'm overjoyed," Wade said, leaning up to kiss her. "A bit terrified, if I'm honest, but mostly overjoyed. We're going to be parents." The next week, they made the trip to Trinidad so Willa could see the doctor. He confirmed what she already suspected. She was about 3 months along, which meant the baby would arrive sometime in late winter or early spring. Dr. Morrison gave her instructions for maintaining her health and warned her against overtaxing herself. "You need to rest more, eat well, and let your husband handle the heavy work," he said sternly. "I know ranch life is demanding, but you have to think of the baby now." Wade took the doctor's words to heart, becoming almost comically protective. He insisted on doing all the heavy lifting, refused to let Willa climb ladders or work with the larger animals, and constantly asked if she was feeling well. At first, Willa chafed at the restrictions, but eventually she came to appreciate his concern. She focused on lighter tasks, tending the chickens, maintaining the garden, and preparing for the baby's arrival. As winter settled in again, Willa spent her evenings sewing baby clothes from soft flannel fabric she had bought in town. Wade built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk and carving meadowlarks into the headboard. They transformed a corner of the bedroom into a nursery area, preparing as best they could for the new life that would soon join them. Willa's body changed as the baby grew, her belly swelling beneath her dresses. Wade seemed fascinated by the transformation, often resting his hand on her stomach to feel the baby kick. The first time he felt movement, his face lit up with such joy that Willa laughed through her tears. "That's our child," he said wonderingly. "That's our son or daughter in there, already making their presence known." "Strong like their father," Willa said, placing her hand over his. "Determined like their mother," Wade countered with a smile. The winter was milder than the previous year, or perhaps it just seemed that way because Willa had Wade beside her and the future to look forward to. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about names and making plans for after the baby arrived. Wade was determined that Willa would have help, and he arranged for a neighbor woman, Mrs. Chen, who lived about 5 miles away and had birthed 6 children of her own, to come stay with them when Willa's time drew near. In early March, as the snow was beginning to melt, Willa woke in the middle of the night with a pain low in her back. She lay still for a moment, wondering if she had simply slept wrong, but then another pain came, stronger this time, wrapping around from her back to her belly. She placed her hand on her stomach and knew the baby was coming. "Wade," she said quietly, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up. It's time." Wade came awake instantly, years of rising early for ranch work making him alert in seconds. "The baby?" he asked, already throwing off the blankets. "Yes," Willa confirmed, another contraction making her gasp. "You need to fetch Mrs. Chen." Wade was torn, clearly not wanting to leave her, but Willa insisted. "I'll be fine for the hour or two you're gone, but I need her here for the birth. Please, Wade." Reluctantly, Wade dressed and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness, riding fast toward the Chen ranch. Willa used the time alone to prepare, changing into an old nightgown and laying out the supplies Dr. Morrison had told them they would need. The contractions came steadily, growing stronger and closer together. She walked around the cabin, finding that movement helped with the pain, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Wade returned with Mrs. Chen just as the sun was rising. The older woman was calm and efficient, taking stock of the situation with practiced eyes. She sent Wade to heat water and then turned her attention to Willa. "First baby?" she asked, and Willa nodded. "They take their time usually, could be hours yet. Let's get you comfortable." It was indeed hours, long hours of increasing pain and effort. Mrs. Chen remained steady throughout, offering encouragement and practical advice. Wade stayed nearby, holding Willa's hand through the contractions, his face pale but determined. Willa had never loved him more than in those moments, seeing his strength and care even when he was clearly terrified. Finally, as the afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, Mrs. Chen announced it was time to push. Willa bore down with everything she had, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. Wade supported her from behind, his arms around her, his voice in her ear telling her how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. And then, with one final push that left her utterly exhausted, the baby slipped free. A cry filled the cabin, lusty and strong, and Mrs. Chen laughed. "A boy," she announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Wade's arms tightened around Willa, and she felt his tears on her neck. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." Mrs. Chen cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Willa's arms. Willa looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not thought possible. This was her child, hers and Wade's, a new life created from their love. "He's beautiful," she breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand. His fingers wrapped around hers instinctively, and she felt tears stream down her face. "Hello, little one, we've been waiting for you." Wade leaned over her shoulder, staring at their son with an expression of absolute wonder. "What should we name him?" he asked softly. They had discussed many names over the winter, but looking at their son's face, Willa knew exactly what felt right. "Matthew," she said, "after your father, Matthew Wade Lawson." Wade's eyes shone with emotion. "Matthew," he repeated. "That's perfect, Mrs." Chen stayed with them for 3 days, helping Willa learn to nurse the baby and recover from the birth. On the 4th day, she declared both mother and baby healthy and prepared to return to her own family. Wade tried to pay her, but she waved him off. "You paid me already, and generously," she said. "Besides, it was my pleasure. You have a fine son, Mrs. Lawson. May he bring you much joy." After Mrs. Chen left, Willa and Wade settled into their new life as parents. It was exhausting and overwhelming and wonderful all at once. Matthew was a hungry baby who woke frequently in the night, and Willa walked the floor with him often, singing soft songs while Wade slept fitfully, ready to wake at the slightest sound. During the day, Wade would carry Matthew in a sling while doing lighter chores, talking to his son about the ranch and the animals and everything they would do together when Matthew was older. As spring progressed into summer, Matthew grew chubby and happy, his eyes tracking movement and his mouth forming what might have been smiles. Willa and Wade adjusted to parenthood, learning to work together in this new way, dividing tasks and supporting each other through the difficult moments. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Matthew sleeping peacefully in Willa's arms, Wade turned to her with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "About what we want to build here, not just for us but for Matthew and any other children we might have." "What have you been thinking?" Willa asked. "I want to expand the ranch properly," Wade said. "Build a bigger house, one with real bedrooms and maybe even an indoor pump for water. Increase our herd, hire help when we need it. Make Meadowlark Ranch into something substantial, something Matthew can inherit and be proud of. That sounds wonderful, Willa said, but it will take time and money. I know, Wade agreed, but we've already accomplished so much. 2 years ago, you stepped off a train with nothing but a carpet bag and a mountain of debt. Look at us now. We're debt-free, we have a working ranch and a beautiful son. If we could do all that, we can do anything. Willa looked at her husband, this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to stay, who had worked beside her and believed in her when she barely believed in herself. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first winter of hardship and uncertainty to this moment of peace and promise. "You're right," she said, reaching over to take his hand. "We can do anything, as long as we do it together." The years that followed were full of hard work but also great happiness. True to Wade's vision, they gradually expanded Meadowlark Ranch. They built a proper 2-story house with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a sitting room. They hired seasonal help during busy times, and Wade trained several young men in ranch work, earning a reputation as a fair and knowledgeable employer. The cattle herd grew, and they added sheep as well, diversifying their income. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch from the ground up. When he was 3, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a placid baby with Wade's eyes and Willa's determined chin. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they called James. The cabin where Willa and Wade had spent that first difficult winter was converted into a bunkhouse for hired hands. Sometimes, Willa would walk out there and stand in the main room, remembering those early days when survival had seemed so uncertain. She would think about the woman she had been then, scared and overwhelmed but determined to succeed, and feel grateful for the journey that had transformed her. As Matthew's 10th birthday approached, Wade surprised them all by bringing home a piano from Denver. It took 6 men to move it into the house, and Willa stared at it in astonishment. "Wade, we can't afford this," she protested, though her fingers were already itching to touch the keys. "We can," Wade assured her. "The ranch is doing well, and I remember you telling me once that you played as a child before your parents died. I thought you might like to play again and teach the children." Willa threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. That evening she sat at the piano and played, her fingers remembering melodies she had not thought of in years. The children gathered around, entranced, and Wade stood in the doorway watching with a smile. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick and crops that failed. But through it all, Willa and Wade faced everything together, their partnership only growing stronger with time. They were respected in Trinidad, known as honest dealers and good neighbors. Their children grew healthy and happy, learning the value of hard work and the importance of family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade took Willa back to the spot where they had first kissed, that night when the bear had appeared and he had pulled her close. It was summer now, and the evening was warm and golden. "Do you remember?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Of course I remember," Willa said, leaning back against him. "I remember everything about that winter. How hard it was, how scared I was sometimes, how you told me to rest and said you would handle the chores. You expected to work like a mule all winter," Wade said, repeating words that had become something of a joke between them over the years. "And you wouldn't let me," Willa finished. "You took care of me, taught me, believed in me. You gave me everything, Wade." "You gave me everything," Wade countered, turning her in his arms so they were face to face. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start building. I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, and I loved you desperately even then. I love you too, Willa said, reaching up to touch his face. He was older now, gray threading through his dark hair, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing us. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting and every day since. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, their laughter carrying on the evening air. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-tended, a testament to everything they had built together. When they finally returned to the house, Matthew met them at the door. "Ma, Pa, come quick. Sarah says she saw a meadowlark at the window singing." They followed their son inside, where Sarah was bouncing excitedly at the window. "It was right there," she insisted, pointing. "It sang the prettiest song." Wade caught Willa's eye and they shared a smile, remembering that first Christmas and the carved bird that had started it all. These meadowlarks, both real and symbolic, had come to represent everything good about their life together. Hope, beauty, and the promise of new beginnings. As the years continued to pass, Meadowlark Ranch became one of the most successful in the area. Matthew eventually took over much of the daily operation, though Wade remained involved, teaching his son everything he knew. Sarah proved to have a gift with horses, breeding and training them with skill that impressed even the most experienced ranchers. James, the youngest, showed an interest in business and started handling the ranch's accounts and sales. Willa and Wade grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents, watching their children fall in love and start families of their own. The house that had once seemed so large filled with the noise and laughter of grandchildren, and Willa spent her days teaching them to read and play piano, while Wade took them riding and showed them the same meadowlark spots he had shown their parents. On a warm summer evening in 1913, 30 years after Willa had first stepped off that train in Trinidad, she and Wade sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their early 50s now, still healthy and active, but with the contentment of people who had lived full lives. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked, a question that had become a sort of tradition between them over the years. "Leaving St. Louis, coming here?" "Never," Willa said, the same answer she always gave. "This life, this place, you, our children and grandchildren, everything we've built, I wouldn't trade any of it for anything in the world. Even that first winter," Wade teased, "when you thought you'd work like a mule and I had to tell you to rest." "Especially that first winter," Willa said, taking his hand. "Because that's when I learned what it meant to have a partner, someone who saw my worth even when I didn't see it myself. That's when I fell in love with you, Wade Lawson, and started building the life I never dared to dream was possible." Wade brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "I fell in love with you the moment I opened that door and saw you standing there with your carpet bag, looking determined and terrified all at once. I just didn't have the sense to tell you right away." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. In the barn, they could hear Matthew giving instructions to the ranch hands about tomorrow's work. From the house came the sound of children laughing as Sarah supervised dinner. The meadowlarks sang their evening songs, filling the air with music. This was more than Willa had ever imagined that cold November day when she had arrived at her aunt's failing ranch. This was home, family, love, and legacy. This was everything she had worked for, everything Wade had helped her build, everything they had created together out of determination and hope, and the courage to face whatever challenges came their way. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Wade stood and extended his hand to Willa. "Come on, Mrs. Lawson. Let's go inside. Our family is waiting." Willa took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, the gesture as natural and comfortable as it had been 30 years ago, yet somehow deeper, richer, more meaningful with all they had shared. They walked inside together, leaving the door open so the evening breeze could follow them, carrying with it the songs of meadowlarks and the promise of another good day tomorrow on the ranch they had built together. The life they had created, the love that had sustained them through everything and would continue to sustain them for all the years to come.